Yeah, now recording. So if you are on screen, you will be recorded. If you don't want to be recorded, you can turn your camera off until the second half.
Great, thanks, Jane. Okay, so I'm going to kick us off by talking about my own experience of living with and beyond cancer. So I had a rectal cancer diagnosis back in September 2021. I was just 23 at the time, and the diagnosis came through A&E, sadly. I'd been unwell for a long time before that, and unfortunately, I wasn't taken seriously enough at the GP. So when I was told that I had cancer, it was a huge shock, and it completely changed my life. I had to undergo lots of treatment, chemoradiation, chemotherapy, and surgery, and I was declared no evidence of disease in July of 2022. And after that diagnosis, life as I knew it stopped. I basically put my whole life on hold for cancer. I had to give up work and I was told to shield. So it meant I stopped seeing my friends and family. And, on the one hand, this was good. It meant that I never got ill during my treatment. Everything went ahead as planned. I was able to have all of the treatment. And luckily, I had a complete response as well. But it also meant that I had to stop doing all the things I love. I couldn't work as an actor, which is my passion, and I couldn't have the support that I wanted from my loved ones. So, what did I do to help me cope with cancer treatment and the isolation? Well, movement is really important to me. So, I try to keep walking as much as I can. And I had tailored exercise one-to-ones on Zoom, which I found really beneficial. I think when you're going through cancer treatment, it can be a bit daunting and you're not sure what's safe to do. So having that personalized support was really important. I also attended support groups online, met other people who had bowel cancer as well, and I'm still in contact with those people to this day. We have a little group chat going, and talking to other people who just get it is so important. I also had tailored support, things like Look Good, Feel Better, which is a makeup course, which I loved. I had support from teenage and young adult cancer charities, and I also ventured into patient advocacy, which led me to do the work with the East of England Cancer Alliances. And this is what worked for me. But I want to stress that there's kind of no right way to live with and beyond cancer, and what works for one person won't work for others. But I would say, on the whole, that I coped very well during my treatment phase in terms of my mental health. I was fortunate to have counselling support throughout. And I think it was only when I finished all of that that I struggled. That's mostly because I aged out of the teenage and young adult services just before I was having an operation, sadly. It was supposed to be the last one that I had, and then I could think about moving on with life. But sadly, I developed late effects and I got pulled back into the cancer world, and it led to more surgical interventions. And I would say that that really affected my mental health more than the treatment. And at the time, the support wasn't really there. This was something that I had to seek out myself. And it's taken up until now, when I've had the option to delay a major operation, that I feel like I'm in control of my life again. Now I'm about to go and train and perform for 9 months. So really, I'm kind of starting to prove to myself that there is life beyond cancer, which is really exciting. But it's taken a lot to get there, and a lot of hard work in between dealing with ill health. And there's been times where it's felt really overwhelming, and I just wish I didn't have all of the effects of treatment to deal with. But I think that's part of the process of acceptance. Acceptance that your body will change and some things can't go back to the way they were. And that's incredibly difficult to accept. And I think as patients, we have to give ourselves the space to sit with those feelings, as well as learning how to manage things to give yourself the best quality of life. One of the things I found really helpful is kind of moving the goalposts, both during cancer and after treatment. Sort of looking at things from a kind of a different angle. Yeah, there might be things that I can't do now, but what can I do instead? Like, if I'm on treatment, for example, and I don't feel like I can go for a run, which might be something I do normally, could I go for a walk instead? That sort of thing. And I think the same applies after we finish treatment as well. I think there can be a tendency to want to sort of get back to a normal life. But normal will probably look different from what it did before. It certainly does for me. I'm certainly not the same as I was before. But I find that I can adapt my life around what I can do rather than focusing on what I can't. And I find that really helpful. And as long as I can keep doing a lot of the things that I want to, then I feel like I'm okay. Um, so I think if I could give sort of one piece of advice to someone living with and beyond cancer, it's not to lose yourself in the process. I shut myself away because I had to, and whilst I did a lot to help me cope with cancer, like in many ways, I did lose who I was and stop doing a lot of the things that I love. But I never let my dreams and my aspirations fade away. And I told myself I would still do what I want with my life afterwards, even if it means it looks a little different from before. And now my life is about to change for the better. By not going ahead with surgery now, I can go and do something really exciting, which is great. You may have to adapt things, but I think it's important not to let cancer take away the things that you love, whether that's something as small as a little hobby that you do, or a career. It's so important that those things don't get forgotten about just because we have a cancer diagnosis. So I'm going to hand over to Kynwyn now, who's going to talk about her experience, as well as some support that's available. Thanks, Kynwyn.
Thanks, Holly. And yeah, hopefully I can follow what you've said. I think a lot of what I'm going to talk about actually touches on stuff you've said as well. So I'm just going to try and share my screen. Like we did practice this earlier. So let me just see.
Yeah, we can see that, Kynwyn.
Can
and
you?
the slides. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Hold on. Let me see if I can see you and the slides. There. Is that okay? You can see everything.
Yeah, we can see
Okay,
everything.
Perfect. Okay. So Jane and Holly very kindly asked me to join you today to talk about psychosocial support for people affected by cancer. And I think if you've had cancer, I feel like you probably go like, yeah, totally, I get this. If you haven't, then hopefully it will maybe make you think. And I guess if you're in patient advocacy like I've been and like Holly is, maybe there's some stats in there that you can pull out and use for something else. So I thought I would talk a little bit about my own personal perspective on cancer and mental health, a little bit about why we need to pay more attention to mental health and cancer, and also where next. But first of all, just in terms of my personal perspective, I mean, I guess Holly was younger than I was when I was diagnosed. I was diagnosed 14 years ago. But at that time, I worked in a consultancy firm in international development, and I traveled about 80 days a year. So I worked a lot in West Africa, in Sierra Leone, which I really loved, but also in Southeast Asia. So back in, this is 2009 now, I was pregnant. I'd never been pregnant before. So I was really excited to be having a baby, but I really didn't feel very well. And everyone, I just kind of thought, oh, it was pregnancy. I had a lot of bad headaches, really low energy, feeling sick. But I ended up getting quite severely ill in that I went to the midwife and they said, oh, your blood pressure is sky high. You need to go to the hospital. And never having been sick or been in the hospital before, I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to go home and have lunch. And then I'll, take the bus to the hospital. And then once I got to the hospital, I didn't end up leaving for a very long time because I was diagnosed 6 weeks later with stage 4 non-Hodgkin lymphoma. So I actually had my daughter by emergency C-section about 3 days after that high blood pressure came about. And I spent 6 weeks actually telling people I didn't feel well. And everybody said it was pregnancy complications, that the lumps that I had were, blocked milk ducts, that it was very common when I'd had such severe pregnancy complications to feel unwell. And a bit like Holly, actually, I did get out of the hospital for a few days and then ended up going back in via an emergency route because I had terrible back pain. And even then, it took them a couple of weeks to work out what was wrong. So I was eventually diagnosed with stage 4 non-Hodgkin lymphoma. This must have been after I'd been in the hospital, this photo, for a few months, because I'd already lost my hair, and my daughter has a little bit of meat on her bones there. She was really skinny when she was born because she was born 6 weeks early. But I had to spend 5 months, almost 6 months, as an inpatient in the hospital. And you know, for me, this was absolutely devastating because I couldn't be with my daughter. I think the effect of it, I mean, it affected every single person that was close to me because it was very hard for my husband to work. I had friends and family. I'm from Canada originally, so I had friends and family from Canada come and stay with us in our 1-bedroom flat to look after our daughter. I had friends from here, from the UK, helping as well, but it was really tough. And I did have some psychological support while I was in the hospital. I didn't really like the counselor that used to come to see me, but because I spent 6 months in isolation, I remember thinking, well, I can't tell her I'm busy. So she would just show up at the room, and I had to talk to her, but I didn't really like her. I did have some chaplaincy support, but I'm not really a Christian in that I've never really been to church. And because I've lived in Southeast Asia, I actually thought, oh, maybe I could speak to a Buddhist. So apparently I was the first person in the history of this hospital to request to see a Buddhist monk. But they got a Buddhist monk to come and see me. And actually he was great. And he used to come and visit me once a week, and we'd have really interesting chats. So I really enjoyed that. And that kind of kept me going. I was very lucky in that I got into remission, and given how advanced my cancer was at the time, you know, that was kind of felt like nothing short of a miracle. But obviously that was my maternity leave. So I went back to work part-time 7 months after I finished treatment. And I had what I later found out were symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. So I guess a bit like Holly said, you know, you want to get back to your life, you want to keep going, you finish treatment. But I would cry every morning in the shower. I was absolutely petrified that I was going to get sick again. And I think because I hadn't realized how sick I'd been the first time, it feels very difficult, like you've lost trust in your body, because if you can be so sick that you're practically dying and not even know it. I kept feeling like it was going to sneak up on me. I was very lucky that I was actually referred to a survivorship program at a local hospice. And there was a hypnotherapist there. And I thought hypnotherapy sounded really weird, but I was like, oh, I'll give it a go. And honestly, he changed my life. He was amazing. And he, 2 sessions in said, I think you have PTSD. And then we went through a whole process of something called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprogramming. And I found that really useful because I think I had basically 6 months of really difficult experiences locked in my brain that I couldn't process. Now, unfortunately, about 18 months after I was first diagnosed with cancer, I got sick again. Ended up back in the hospital, and again, nobody knew what was wrong with me. They initially thought I'd relapsed from lymphoma, and then decided I hadn't. And actually, I had meningitis. And I think that was almost the cancer and the pregnancy was pretty tough, but having meningitis and being back in the hospital 18 months after I thought, okay, I can try to put this behind me, was really awful. And it almost sort of emotionally broke me. I was really depressed. I was very ill from the meningitis. So I spent another month in the hospital and then had to take about 4 months off work because I wasn't strong enough to go back. But they discovered that I had an immune deficiency, which is a result of my cancer treatment. So like Holly said, she lives with, late effects, long-term effects of cancer treatment. This is my long-term effect. My immune system has never come back. And so up until the pandemic, I was going to the hospital once a month for infusions. And that meant that I would usually have to take the next day off work because the medicine didn't make me feel very well. Obviously had to take time off work to go to the hospital to get the infusion. So it was quite difficult. But the plus side of that was I went once a month, and then once I was over it, I could forget about it. Obviously having an immune deficiency in the pandemic was not a great thing. Again, at the beginning, like Holly, I was advised to shield. You'd get text messages saying, like, basically open a window if you need fresh air, like don't even go outside. So I found that really psychologically difficult as well, because I kept thinking, well, I've survived cancer and I've survived meningitis. I don't want to die of COVID now. That seems like it would be a waste. So it wasn't an easy time. During that period, because going into the hospital wasn't advised, I then switched to doing home therapy. So I do infusions 4 times a week at home subcutaneously. And the plus side of that is I get much fewer side effects in terms of feeling sick, but obviously it's also, I have to remember to do them 4 times a week. So I think with a lot of these things, there's a real balance, and we often think like, oh, patients want their treatment at home, but actually I've never been able to decide if that's the right thing. I think it has its pluses and its minuses. But in terms of the impact that this had on me, I mean, I didn't know that you could have cancer and be pregnant. I didn't know anybody that this had ever happened to. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, but I felt really lonely. And I think my mental health took a real hit. Like Holly talked about, movement can be really important. I had always been really fit. And in fact, I had this thing in my head where I kept telling the doctors, like, no, but I can't be sick. You don't understand. I was running 10Ks before I got pregnant. And they were like, well, it'll be good that you were fit, it'll help you. But I found that really difficult, that my fitness had gone so downhill because I pretty much lay in bed for 6 months. So, my career took a hit as well, because I had an immune deficiency. I wasn't able to travel in the same way. I got demoted at work, which is illegal, but I worked for a small company in a pretty tough industry, and also didn't really have the mental or emotional energy to fight that at the time. I was suffering from a lot of fatigue, and I had PTSD and anxiety. So it wasn't, I think, a surprise if you look at that I was depressed, but I almost found the depression really difficult because all of this was jumbled up together. I've been really lucky that like I said, I had a hypnotherapist. I've seen some other therapists and counselors, and they've kind of helped me unpick things. And obviously I've been lucky enough to have a long-term remission and get physically stronger as well. So it's not all sad news, but it was really difficult for a very long time. And actually, when Holly said she was diagnosed in 2021 and she's kind of coming out the other side, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm 14 years down the line, and I sometimes feel like I'm still unpicking the impact of all of this. So like I said, this is 13 years later, but it's actually 14. It's not a sad story. My daughter is great. Although today I had to take her to get braces, and she told me I was the worst mother ever. But I have also, getting my fitness back. I'm doing a half marathon next month. So I slowly feel like I'm kind of getting back to where I was, but it's been a really long process. But I think mental health and cancer is one of those things that actually we don't talk about enough. And there's some really interesting evidence that's coming out, I think, about why it's important. So, there's good evidence that shows that people who are diagnosed with cancer experience higher rates of anxiety and depression than other people, with women more frequently affected. One study here of women newly diagnosed with breast cancer found that almost 40% of the sample that they looked at had clinically relevant anxious symptoms, and a quarter of the sample had significant depressive symptoms. A lot of these studies tend to look at people kind of 1 year, maybe 5 years out of treatment. But there's a new study. There's this study as well. I'll talk about the other one in a second. This one also talks about, cancer survivors more likely to report feeling nervous or anxious, but also lonely and hopeless. And I think loneliness is a really key thing, especially for younger people, because you probably the first person in your friend or family group that's had cancer. But I think for anyone affected by cancer, you often do feel lonely, because ultimately illness can be a very lonely place to be. You are left alone with your sickness. Nobody else can share it with you. Sorry, this was the study I wanted to talk about. So this hasn't actually come out yet. It's been submitted to a couple of journals. But this is one of the first studies that has looked at long-term mental health in cancer survivors. It's been done by a group at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And one of the things that they found was that survivors, they looked at 20 different cancer types between 1998 and 2021. And they found across all 20 cancer types, the people who had had cancer had a higher risk of experiencing a new episode of anxiety and depression during follow-up compared with cancer-free individuals. So that's looking at people over 30 years. There's also evidence of risks of non-fatal self-harm and even suicide in 8 out of 20 cancers. So I think this study, when it's published, it's in a preprint at the moment, but when this is published, it's going to be really important in demonstrating that actually the mental health impact of cancer is not just something people experience while they're going through cancer treatment or even a year after survival, but it carries on and it can affect people kind of 20 or 30 years down the line. I think in terms of, obviously, when you're suffering with mental ill health, it's really tough. From an economic point of view, mental health problems cost the UK economy, £117 billion per year. So this is something we need to look at, especially given that 1 in 2 people will get cancer and half of them will live at least 10 years. So we need psychosocial support, which is really fit for purpose and future-proofed as well. During the pandemic, so I used to chair the Public and Patient Voices Forum for the NHS England Cancer Programme. And during the pandemic, some of our members worked with people in the NHS England Cancer Programme to develop a task and finish group on psychosocial support, and they had a number of recommendations. Those recommendations were taken forward, they were put into a handbook, and the cancer alliances across the country are working on them and trying to make them a reality. But this was really the first time that anyone at the national level had asked the question of what would good look like in terms of mental health support for people living with cancer. So it was a really important step forward. It also recommended a lot of different types of support that should be made available to cancer patients. Some of it's different levels of support, so sort of universal support that should be available to everyone, all the way through to specialist support, say palliative care, which would only be available to certain people. One thing I felt the recommendations didn't necessarily draw out enough was the value of peer support. And I think peer support, like Holly said, being with people who just get it is really important. And I think we underestimate that, because actually there is something about being surrounded by people who understand what it's like to live with cancer. I think it's so valuable that even if you're not talking about cancer, actually you can have a more meaningful conversation because the people understand where you're coming from. So I just wanted to talk to you briefly at the end about Shine. So one of the things that I had worked in community development internationally before I was sick. And once I was ill, I started looking around for support. I was in my 30s and couldn't really find any. And with my colleague, Emma, we have grown Shine into a national charity. So we're still really small. We've only got eight staff, but we run a lot of different programs of support for people. So if you know anyone in their 20s, 30s, and 40s who's had cancer, we have online support and information. That's everything from a one-off meetup to a number of 6-week programs. We have a specific program actually for people who are 22 to 28 who are moving from teenage and young adult care into adult care. So that was one of the things Holly pointed to, and we've developed a specific program called the Reset program around that. We've also got in-person support and activities. So we've got meetups across the country, including in Norwich and Cambridge. And then we also do advocacy and training for healthcare professionals. So we have a regular workshop, which is CPD accredited, that we run for healthcare professionals. It's free, so anyone can join it. But we're also starting to work with cancer alliances to look at how we can improve services. So we've been doing a little bit of work with the Southeast London Cancer Alliance, looking at what gaps exist and how we might be able to sort of clarify pathways for young adults with cancer. And again, just to go back to that bit about peer support, we know from our last impact survey that people who have attended Shine events feel less stressed and less depressed. And some of the things that they've told us are things like, as soon as I started attending online support groups for Shine, I felt more resilient and better able to handle treatment. Connecting with other people who have had a cancer diagnosis helped me feel less afraid of everything cancer might throw at me. And somebody else talked about, they'd felt so alone with their cancer experience, but that also that they'd really struggled to convey the impact of it to people, but that going to Shine and talking to other people had helped them. So if you do know anyone or you are in our aid group, we would really welcome you. We do provide a little bit of counseling when it's linked to our programs, but we very much focus on the psychosocial impact of cancer, and it's something we feel really passionately about, needs to be better supported. So if anyone wants to get in touch, shinecancersupport.org is our website. Like I said, we have a number of online programs, 6-week online programs, which are open to apply to. And my email is kindwen@shinecancersupport.org. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to drop me a line, or you can find us on places like Instagram as well. That's it. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you, Kindwin. And thank you for sharing, all the work that you do at Shine. It's amazing to hear that you're working to sort of bridge the gap for young adults as well. I think that's where we do fall short, is that gap between when you age out of the teenage and young adult services into adult cancer services. So it's amazing to hear that that you're doing work there, and you've got great feedback from patients about the support available. As you say, and as I touched on as well, I think that peer support and just being able to talk to people who get it is so important. And thank you for being so open and honest about your own experience as well. And I know I said I only was diagnosed back in 2021, and I feel like I'm getting my life back. But I know that the impact of this will last a lifetime, and that there will be ups and downs, I'm sure, along the way. But that long-term mental health support after you finish cancer, that's why it's so important, and we absolutely need more of it. Brilliant. Jane, do you want to stop the recording?